I am extraordinarily fond of Mushoku Tensei. It's really caught my eye by way of its fine craftsmanship and clear indication of a promising narrative progression. As someone who sifted through hundreds and hundreds of series, each season weighing which show is worth my time to continue, most shows barely pull me past the first episode, especially with Isekai. I've got little patience for mediocrity unless it's this stupid Azure Lane series because I like looking at cute things for 8 minutes. Why aren't every single one of these nothing cute girl shows like 8 minutes an episode? I'd probably spend all my time watching them then. Well, maybe it's actually for the best that they aren't then. My tastes aside, I just wanted to spend some time on a series that I think is strong for a diverse and interesting range of reasons, masterfully nailing all the little and seemingly basic but often flubbed elements of structure and presentation. The devil's in the details, and Mushoku Tensei knows its way around them well. So hopefully in doing so, I can point out some cool things that you might not have noticed or appreciated as much as they might merit. Part of what makes this series work, at least so far, is the way it structures itself. There is a steady pace with which the story continually moves forward, and despite it moving at a pretty fast pace, progressing in some cases years in the span of a single 24-minute episode, still finds a lot of time to build the characters. The way it does this is by balancing these slice-of-life interpersonal character drama moments with a gradual expansion of the setting and steady increase in stakes. The world starts small, but continually, bit by bit, gets bigger. Things characters mention offhandedly, we meet episodes later. Something we see off in the horizon or drifting in the sky hinted as an eventual destination. That sense of setup and payoff makes the moment enjoyable while pairing it with a continual anticipation for what's to come next, without it feeling merely like the story is making things up as we go along. I could honestly spend forever listing the little one-off lines that are paid off on later. In terms of plot or character, it constantly connects the past, present, and future, so that besides just giving us time to become attached to the characters, which alone is well worth praise, it also gives those lax moments narrative context. At first we have Dudias and his home, his family, and Doxy. The purpose of these early episodes threefold: a tight balance of humor and characterization to build the relationships for us to be invested in when the stakes increase far later, development of the magic system and Dudias' development with such, which will be the basis for the believability of its advanced skills later on, and finally, introducing the first major conflict which will present the main theme of the series. Here, Dudias must overcome his fear of the outdoors, or more specifically, the outside world, a holdover from his bad experiences in his past life. The point being, he learns that people aren't so bad. He learns to trust, and he learns to grow. The idea of growing, improving, and overcoming oneself is central to Mushoku Tensei's ideals, not to excuse or justify immoral actions, but to still promote betterment in spite of them. This is reflected later on in Doxy overcoming her feelings of inadequacy with how quickly Dudias reaches close to her level, instead choosing to use it as inspiration to improve further and ultimately doing so. Or how Eris is introduced as essentially a spoiled, selfish brat. Apt to solve problems with violence over words, she is taught to take time to listen and learn, after seeing the inadequacy of that mindset and the value of, that's right, self-betterment. The series doesn't operate in binary though. It's not as if this is a problem that is immediately resolved. Characters grapple with their flaws over time in a progressive manner, which is far more interesting and far more believable. Like how even after she's quote-unquote learned her lesson, we still see her excessive outburst over something as simple as a broken button, even if it might have been someone influenced by the extremely stressful situation she was in at the time. While Eris has made some progress in terms of her anger and pride, demonstrating some examples of growing humility, it is still a part of her character, her personality, a product of her environment that she will continue to grapple with. Alongside that is the idea of not judging one based on superficial elements, but rather on who they are. Dudias has to see past his own preconceived judgment of the outside world in its entirety, and in finally seeing those neighbors for who they are, is met with kind face after kind face, realizing his fear was entirely unwarranted. Doxy feared judgment for her hair color, Sylphie faces judgment for her hair color, all related to the resemblance to that of the demonized demons, superb, and the superb Duijerd faces judgment for being precisely that. Yet because Dudius can function as an outsider of sorts, lacking a lot of the biases inherent to the setting due to his knowledge of his past life, he can strip away those surface level judgments and begin to see people as they are. The series demonstrates the way this kind of prejudice can perpetuate itself, showing us the pervasiveness of a simple old wives' tale.
子供の頃、よく言われたものです。夜遅くまで起きていると、スペルト族がやってきて食べてしまうぞ。お母様ったら嘘ばっかり。早く寝ないとスペルト族に食べられちゃうなんて。
How, if you don't go to bed in time, the superb will come and gobble you up. From Dudius and Addis's mom and beyond, it's a common phrase, and even in spite of it being 400 years since their days of active infamy, most who would have seen them in that time long dead, the effects of such messaging can eat away at even ones who were directly aided by a superb. The unconscious fear in the eyes of Kurt when Duijerd's disguise is lifted, even though this was the very man he had to thank for his life still being here to see it. It's also interesting because Duijerd as a character serves to, in a way, connect these two main ideas, growth and impartiality, serving as someone who desires to and must grow, both for his sins of the past, but also still possessing an excessive, violent mentality in spite of his desire to redeem the perception of his people. Duijerd is a recipient to such discrimination on the basis of that perception, but also is someone who himself perpetuates that kind of toxic mindset, incapable of viewing people in terms other than black and white, even in cases where it is completely hypocritical. Once Duijerd sees things one way, his perception is seemingly set in stone, but what he has to come to realize is that our perception must be able to grow.
動物をさらったぐらいなんだって言うのよ。
子供を蹴りもした。
蹴るぐらい私だってするわよ。
だが悪は悪だ。
あんただって昔は。
Backing up a bit, following Dudius overcoming his fear of the outside world, we have him meet Sylphie, and the scene in which he's presented is already a pretty clever one. Firstly, he saves her as a victim of bullying, another example of him overcoming his past trauma by directly confronting that which led to his own self-isolation, and being able to use that development in order to help another person in a similar situation. It's also, in my opinion, a smart choice to have the character be obscured from Dudius' view until after his act of virtue. A lot of series have the main character act to save another after seeing they're a cute girl, and sure, it's nice, but I do feel it undermines their act a bit when it only happens after spotting a potential addition to their harem. Here, Dudius acts without care for who is being bullied. It's impartial, and that's important. Sylphie's episode also further serves to hammer home how Dudius isn't particularly special by default in much other than his foreknowledge, with Sylphie being able to recreate the extra power boost from youthful training that he himself underwent, as well as the incantationless spellcasting, which is presented in a funny scene which directly acknowledges that this undermines the perception of him being special. I will admit that this episode is far from my favorite though. Awkward humor is very hit or miss for me, and the conflict being predicated entirely on absurd misunderstandings feels pretty trite, even if it does accomplish a lot outside of that fairly tired element. There is one thought I had to myself when watching this section that in retrospect I find rather humorous, which is how among the primary characters, Sylphie would likely be my least favorite. Because in terms of personality and drive, there's not much to her outside of her attachment to Dudius. The funny part is, that is precisely the worry Paul has, and why he forces them to separate when Dudius takes a job in order to attend magic school together with Sylphie.
お前がシルフィエットに依存し始めているように感じたからだ。それはあの子にとっても良くないと判断した。
The show itself recognizes that Sylphie needs to grow on her own, already showing some of it with the implication in episode 8 being that she finally fought back against her bullies, and that makes me hopeful to see how she develops in the future. Continuing over to the episode following, episode 4 is the episode of Mushoku Tensei that defined it as being something more than your average series. This is the episode that made me really appreciate what the show was doing, because here it's revealed that Paul has been cheating on Zenith with their maid Lydia, and that she is pregnant. This alone is fascinating to me because I genuinely cannot think of many occasions in which this kind of conflict is grappled with in any series fashion. It's awkward, a difficult situation the result of bad actions, and there is no easy resolution. The way the opening theme plays over their quiet contemplation, the tension to it is palpable. While ultimately Rudius is able to resolve the situation somewhat, the scene in which his mother finally decides to let the maid stay and have the child there, the number of emotions you can only imagine going through her mind with that exasperated sigh in a case where the only option is to accept how things are in spite of how deeply uncomfortable it is, it captures a tone that certainly reflects many moments I've experienced, but not many anime I've seen. In the episodes following as well, there's a sense that together as a family they have worked past an obstacle, giving us as the viewer a real sense to their connection, to care about all of these characters, not just viewing them as a starting point from which we're only waiting for Rudius to leave, even if the show is still quick to have his parting, continuing its well-paced expansion of the world and variation of cast. It also serves to effectively characterize Paul, operating in line with some earlier moments that demonstrate his personality and foreshadow this happening.
女好きは俺の血筋だ。遺伝したのだろう。
Paul is a scumbag, cheater, womanizer, and far worse, and yet he's still unmistakably likable. His care for his family, his commitment to the ideals he does hold, his charm and affable nature, in spite of how much of an absolute piece of shit he is, it still shines through. That unmistakable humanity that resonates through in every character, human or not, good or bad. That, I think, is really interesting. Now, in terms of that theme I mentioned earlier of growth and self-improvement, there is also the way the show utilizes stakes, and particularly death or the risk thereof. Now obviously, as an earlier portion of a lengthier narrative, the stakes and body count will likely increase, but breaking it down in explicit numbers, there are only 5 times Rudius directly witnesses someone die. And by someone I obviously mean like sentient individuals, not the speechless monsters they fight throughout. The kidnappers in episode 5, the pet napping bug dude in episode 10, and Kurt's partner and pig guy in episode 11. Despite lack of development on those who die, as you can probably tell by my eloquent nomenclature, most of them being offered just a few lines of dialogue before parting ways with the material realm, because there is so much space between the deaths and weight placed upon it, the deaths do feel like they have meaning and importance in spite of that. These are not just random red shirts. The reaction of the character whom we are most often meant to see the world through, Rudius, is clearly traumatized by seeing these deaths, even in the case of explicitly bad people who were directly threatening him and others. This serves to make me buy into the world more, but the death or risk thereof is also sometimes used to function as a direct response to, result of, or punishment for complacency. That is, the enemy to growth. Rudius and Eris are narrowly saved from death in the precise moment that he is basking in his victory. Kurt's party member dies as a result of Rudius wanting to wait until the moment that will benefit them the most, and this causes Rudius to rethink his one man against the world approach, a second time in which he opens himself to others. In the first, it was his body, but in the second, it is his heart, to trust others and value their perspectives.
僕は今まで一人で全て何とかしなきゃって焦っていました。そしてこれが今回の失敗の原因だと思います。
It's not flawless. I don't want to build a false perception merely because it does have certain things I deeply appreciate. For example, the death of Pig Guy felt pretty shallow to me. It feels more convenient than anything, and Rudius's words of "we'll save him" ring pretty hollow when they, well, can't, and don't really dwell much on feeling bad about that failing after. The reflection more justifiably reserved for Kurt's lost friend. He's offered only a second of somber silence before quickly cutting back to the story. This particular death just didn't feel like it served enough of a purpose when you compare it to how effective the other cases were in terms of telling us something meaningful about the characters. Something that is pretty flawless, though, is its sense of balance. In a similar manner to how the show effectively grows the world around these characters, gradually introducing new settings, lore, and more, in a way that is both easy to parse and raises interest in delving deeper into the minutiae, Mushoku Tensei does a fantastic job of establishing memorable characters and keeping them feeling present in the story even when they are not functioning with the main cast. This is most evident in the case of Roxy, who I love. Roxy is my wife, and I will not accept arguments to the contrary. Yes, I am delusional. When I came into the show on my first viewing, I was both extraordinarily excited to see Roxy again, following her brief depiction in the final scene, but also just generally most enthused about Roxy as a character. I love her design, her personality, I just vibe with her. The interesting thing is, Roxy is really only predominantly present for the first 2 episodes, and still left such a major presence in my mind so as to stick with me as a favorite well after her time in the spotlight had passed. Now, part of this praise obviously goes to the author, the animators, voice actors, and more for helping each character have such a distinct voice. Little charming traits like how Roxy is often playing with her hair, or how Edis is constantly enraptured by little things about the world around them with this lizard or that flytrap. The captivating poses and unique expressions do an awful lot. But even still, if a character were to vanish entirely for 9 episodes, I doubt they'd exactly be at the forefront of my mind. What Mushoku Tensei does, though, is periodically remind us of the characters, connecting everyone together narratively in spite of their distance and drastic difference in screen time. It kinda reminds me of the classic method for memorization I used to learn kanji. At first, you drill something every day, then maybe you wait a couple days, then a week, then a month. That spaced repetition to its reoccurrence locks it into your memory. Roxy may literally leave in episode 2, but she writes him a letter in episode 4 where we see she's been working hard to improve, paying off on her self-conflict earlier and establishing a sense that Rudeus isn't just the center of the world, and that things are moving and changing even when he isn't present. Rudeus and Roxy write each other in episode 7, and she gives him a handmade textbook to help him learn the demon god language, which will be extremely important later on. We briefly see her in episode 8 to foreshadow the far-reaching effects of the mana disaster, and finally we see her in episode 11, reaffirming those effects and hinting at her reunion with Rudeus. There are also a lot of other ways her presence bleeds through the series. The quote-unquote holy relic, the necklace she gives him when Rudeus ends up seeing her birthplace and meeting her parents, the little models he makes of every character, including the understandably profitable Roxy one. Hell, I need one myself. And yes, I know there is a Roxy figure, I just can't justify dropping $200 on that right now. I'm not that big a YouTuber. But like and subscribe and maybe I will be, and thus you too can help encourage bad spending habits. I only use Roxy for the sake of example, but this applies to Sylphie and Rudeus' family as well, albeit to varying degrees. The way everything connects makes everything feel genuinely meaningful, reminding us of all the many connections and influences that lead to Rudeus' development over time. Now, I would be remiss not to mention the stellar presentation, though it's a bit difficult to work in a way that doesn't feel like a point-by-point Mal review. Visually, it goes above and beyond the Call of Duty to excellent effect. Every single action scene is bombastic and filled with exciting cuts of animation while always maintaining the point of focus in the center of the frame or following the line of action, making for moments that are not only hype, but also readable. I never felt any of the common confusion that comes with these type of over-the-top action scenes. The animation has a strong sense of weight to it, giving everything tangible impact. The way it occasionally darkens itself in what I assume is for the same reasons as many darkened action scenes, to reduce chance of epilepsy. In Mushoku Tensei though, it's stylized with starker colors, not just a reduced brightness slider, working around that limitation in a unique and visually engaging fashion. While it does have CG, it's used sparingly and mostly in moments where you won't notice or focus on it. There's plenty of nice little touches as well. I love the cute way Sylphie's ears wiggle when she's excited, how you can visually see here how absolutely dogshit Keelane's handwriting is, the gradually increasing number of figures in Rudeus' room, the giant turtle we see Druid slaying for just a few seconds being the creature whose shell makes the houses in Roxy's tribe we see after, the style change here to show Druid's seething rage, how this is the cutest fucking pose I've ever seen in my goddamn life. I could keep listing, but I think you get the idea. Mushoku Tensei has me excited for what's next, and in a way that I actually have a decent amount of trust that it will deliver on. But even in what we have so far, disregarding the manga and light novel, these 11 episodes set up, say, and accomplish an awful lot, in a way that is well worth its fair measure of praise. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of the video and the series, though please don't spoil me. I'm having plenty of fun taking it in with the anime's presentation for the moment. Special thank you to all my patrons, and if you want to be one of these lovely names, you can support me with the link in the description. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.